to understand 2 Nephi 9, really to understand much of the Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon is pretty straightforward, so it's kind of hard to commentate on it because it's just really pretty straightforward. But what really helps us is to have a doctrinal foundation. So when we read those verses or those scriptures, we understand what's happening there, and we understand that scriptures in general, but the Book of Mormon in particular, really teaches in context. So we don't get a lot of instructions on how to get to the celestial and the terrestrial kingdom. We get mostly saved or damned, or how to go here or how to go here, and that's that contrast that we're always saying. One of the things we also learn and start to do a little bit more is we start to understand that every important gospel word has lots of definitions. And so sometimes when we see the word hell used or some other word, we think we know the definitions, but we start having to look a little deeper and a little more in context. And understanding the doctrine helps us to do that a lot better. Before we get too much further, Sister Cook caused me to do a little thinking last week with her question. Remember the question that she had on agency dealing with the tree and the fact that what did God do after Adam and Eve partook of the fruit or transgressed the law?
Was it my question?
Yeah,
that was me, Sister Press. Yes.
Was it your question?
Yes,
and so it caused me to think, and he places this flaming sword there, and the question I think you posed was, well, did that impinge on Adam and Eve's agency? And then I possibly went on to give the worst answer ever given, and I'm blaming it on a seizure or on I don't know what the problem was. Welcome, come on in. And but what is the answer to that question? Did that impinge on Adam and Eve's agency? Let's go to Acts, can we? So we're going to go into the New Testament just a minute. We're going to get our Acts together and go to Acts 17. These 3 or 4 verses in Acts chapter 17, verses 26 through 29, give us a little bit of the context of your question, I think, Mr. Krause. And so as we look at that, it says this, that God has made, this is the Apostle Paul, he's on the Mars Hill, he's speaking to the unknown God. They have those of you who have been to the Holy Lands, they've got a little place there where there's a little altar and a little thing set in, and so that's the traditional site, I think, there. And he's speaking to the unknown God whom ye ignorantly worship, declare I unto you, which just brings President Hubie Brown's voice to mind when you think of profile of a prophet. Declare I unto you, and they can kind of hear that voice echo off the back wall. Anyway, forget that part. And then we go to verse 26. Hath made of one blood all nations of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed, and the bounds of their habitations. What we learn is that God determines when we're going to be born. And in large part, he determines who you marry, right? Because I'm not saying he determines exactly who you marry. Oh, no, we won't go there. Something that critical, that eternal, that lasting, got to be more than just happenstance. But apart from that, he determines it by when you're born. You're not going to marry someone that was born in the 1700s. You were born now. The reality is people don't even begin to comprehend how Joseph Smith has affected their lives. There's no Salt Lake City without Joseph Smith. There's none of these small towns all through Idaho and everything else. There's no BYU without the prophet. So he has determined beforehand the bounds that we can operate in, and those bounds are set. We don't get to change those. So in the premortal world, Satan's desire was to destroy the agency of men, and in so doing to save every one of our Father's children. The problem is, there were bounds set for him too. And salvation is an individual affair. And God did not impinge on the agency of Adam by not allowing him to partake the fruit, because Adam had agency for Adam. He had agency. He could determine whether he was going to remain a son of God and be exalted, or he had the agency, if he so chose, to become like his son Cain and to become a son of perdition. Each of us have our agency. Each of us will rise and fall on the desires of our hearts and how we operate. We can't limit on a spouse. We can't limit on our upbringing. We can't limit on... That's not to say those things don't have some impact, but God factors all that in. He knows you, and he's known you for eons of time, billions of years. He knows your heart. He knows your circumstances. He knows the trials through which we have passed. And so we have agency to choose ourselves and what will be, right? Is that the song? For God will force no man to heaven. If he had allowed Adam to partake of the fruit, that would have been beyond Adam's bounds. That would allow him to affect me forever and all his children. And that's what it's kind of going to say here as we go in. And we'll see that a little bit more. I wanted to talk, to understand 2 Nephi 9, we've got to understand a few things. One, you have to understand death and what death is and how it operates. Two, we have to understand the nature of our spirits. We're going to look at that for a little bit. And our premortal beginnings. We need to understand a little bit better what the spirit world is, and what paradise is, and what hell is. We have a tendency, and particularly in relation to hell, to be a little Catholic, because that's our back from which we come. It is Protestant and Catholic religion, Judaism, that we start to define those things, and it gives us a poor understanding of what's happening in the spiritual world. So we want to look at that for a little bit, and then we need to understand a little bit better the universality of the resurrection. So 2 Nephi 9 is set in the context of the restoration of all things. A subset of that context of the restoration of all things is resurrection. And understanding the universality of that resurrection and how vast it is will help us far better to see what's going on. So let's begin in going back into 2 Nephi 9. We're going back to our set chapter. Some of it I taught last week, but I want to look at a few things. Let's go to verse 6, which is one that we looked at for a minute last week, but I wanted to tell a little different story on that. For as death is packed upon all men to fulfill the merciful plan of the great Creator, there must needs be a power of resurrection. That solves the problem of death. And the resurrection comes unto men by reason of the fall, and the fall came by reason of transgression, and because men became fallen, they were cut off from the presence of the Lord. Then he started to talk about the atonement, and he goes into that. What is death?
Separation.
So death is the separation of the spirit from the body. What happens when we die? And why are we so afraid of dying? I remember a talk President Nelson gave in conference where he was on an airplane. You remember the talk? The airplane was going to go down. He said the one the next one was screaming hysterically, and he felt peace. And I just thought, well, if I was there, I don't know what I'd be doing. I hope he's not screaming hysterically. I'd probably try and make a phone call or something. I don't know. but I thought that interesting. How do we learn about death?
Well, you have somebody die.
Yeah.
And go through the experience.
We go through the experience. We find out that it's a tough process. We find out that the veil gets thin at the end. We know the story of Brother Brigham Young when he died. The last words he spoke of mortality. He's in a coma the last little bit and being completely bedridden. And just kind of sits up and goes, Joseph, Joseph, Joseph. And I suppose Joseph came and picked up with him and escorted him into the spirit world. My first grand, I think, experience in starting to understand a little bit how death works was with a seminary student. So when I was teaching seminary, I was teaching a young man by the name of Matt Burton. And Matt Burton was a young man. When he was a sophomore, he was playing football. He was a 16-year-old kid. And in a practice, he got hit in the leg. And he thought he had a bone bruise. And he went into the doctor and they did some examination. They discovered he had cancer. And so they went through an extreme process of trying to rid him of that cancer. But it wasn't very successful. He went through the chemotherapy, went through all the things that went with that. They had a rule of alpha leak and wear a hat in seminary except for Matt. And he was just a sweet, sweet kid. His gift was throwing toilet plungers. We would take the head off a toilet plunger, those red ones, not real fancy, and you can zing that baby underhand and stick it to a blackboard. And so, in teaching a lesson on judgment, I had drawn a big target on the board, and I had outer darkness, telestial, terrestrial, celestial. I'm not sure that's how the Lord does it, but you would back up and then you throw this plunger and try and get it to stick and see where you were going in the next life. Matt could zing that baby underhand 100 miles an hour like a fast-pitch softball, and he was just hitting the celestial kingdom every time, and of course all the girls were in love with him, and it went through. Time went on, and Matt gave me a call. He came over to talk, and he wanted to know if the class would pray for him. It was determined that he was going to need to go to the Mayo Institute, I think it's in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and he was going to have his leg amputated, taken off. And he was really hopeful that leg could be taken off below the knee. If he could keep that joint, he figured I can get an artificial leg, I can still play basketball. I'm not maybe the NBA, but I can still do the things I love to do. And I told him, of course we would. And not only that, but we would ask for him. Matt went and talked to his mother, Debbie, and it was a horrendous process. And they did all sorts of exploratory type things, and it was really tough. And about 2 or 3 weeks went by, and all of a sudden I hear a little knock at the door. I was at this time down Lion Seminary was being built back in a portal. And I looked out the door, and there's Matt in a wheelchair. And obviously, the leg had to be removed about mid-thigh. So it was much higher than we'd hoped. And he had about 3 or 4 of the cutest girls in the school. There are perks. And they said, can you come in? Obviously you could. And they literally picked up his chair with him sitting in it and carried it up the 5 or 6 steps into the portable and brought him in. And it was a sweet, sweet experience with the class. Well, time went on, and I got nervous for that. And my job before seminary was in photography, and I called Debbie, and it's a delicate thing. You don't want to say, I don't think your son's not going to make it. I mean, I said, Debbie, I'd really like to come and do photographs of that and with your family. And this is what I do, and would that be okay? And she said, okay. And we came, and we did the photographs, and it took quite a while to do the photographs. We'd do about a few, and then he'd get so tired, and we'd rest for a while, and then we'd do a few more, and then I went home to process it. That's the old days you use film, and it took me a little while to do that, and I went back to see Matt again, and things had gotten a lot more severe, and and he was under 100 pounds, and I'm sitting down looking. His mom's up, making sure he's okay, and I'm sitting at a table, and there's a pamphlet on the table that talks about the transition, which was interesting because it was from the Mayo Institute. They're not religious people; they're doctors and scientists, and this pamphlet was talking about things to look for when a person passes. And they make this transition, and I always thought that interesting, coming from these doctors and stuff, even they believe that there is a transition from going from one point to another point. And I went up a few minutes later and sat down by Matt, and he had 2 or 3 girls in there, and they were telling him about prom and trying to cheer him up, and he would lay there and he'd go, "Oh, I can't breathe. He got me down." This girl would throw her arms around him, pick him up, physically lay him down. And then a few minutes would go past, I gotta sit up. She'd throw her arms around him and physically lift him up and prop him up again. And that went on for quite a while. And not too long after that, Matt passed away. And I went up and I was talking with his mom, Debbie, and she told me this experience. Matt always thought he was going to get better. He exercised faith. He just really believed he was going to get better. And he'd received blessings and done all the things that you would do in the gospel and in the church. But he was still having a tutor come to his house and tutoring him in math. And let me tell you, if I get sick, the first thing that's going to even a thought. How do you get that kid out of here? And so that kind of surprised me that he still was very forward looking to graduating and doing the other things that a normal kid would do. And he had a tutor coming in that was named Hector. And he was from Mexico, and he would come in and he'd teach Matt these lessons in trigonometry or whatever the math he was taking. And Debbie said one day Matt was talking to Hector and said, "Hector, I'm worried about you." And Hector says, what are you worried about?" And Matt says, "I'm not sure that you're going to get to go where I go when I die. I don't know exactly how that works." This is a 17-year-old kid. "Will you promise me, Hector, will you promise me to read the Book of Mormon? And just think about it." And Hector said, "Yeah, I'll read the Book of Mormon." He wasn't saying he's going to be converted or anything like that, but I'll read the Book of Mormon. And so Matt goes on, and Hector goes on, and Matt's goal was to make it to the dedication of the Temple. That is what he really wanted to do, and it was getting close. And as you've been to a temple dedication, you know that your mom or your wife or whoever is going to make you a white hanky. You're going to get a little white hanky, and Matt's mom had made a little white hanky with Mount Temple on it and his name on it. And Debbie went up to sit by his bed, and Matt said to his mom, "Mom, I'm so tired. I'm not getting there. I can't make that appointment." And so Matt picks up this handkerchief, and he wipes his brow, and he hands it to his mom. He says, "Mom, when you go to the temple, you go to the dedication, use my handkerchief, and if the heavens allow, I'll be there." And so she did, and took that handkerchief to the temple dedication for her son Matt. I look back on the experience and I think to myself, how is it possible for a 17-year-old to be so mature in everything that's happening to him, and with the fear of death coming upon him, and he's worried about this little tutor from Mexico and his situation. The rest of the story is that after David was a Mormon, and he go to church. And I spoke at Matt's funeral, and as I spoke, one of the songs they sang was Spirit of God Like Fire is Burning, which obviously is spoke at every temple dedication. And there's a part of that song that says, and we'll sing and we'll shout with the armies of heaven. Well, that is that army. You see, there is a connection between the heavens and the earth. And there is a peace that comes through a young 17-year-old boy just doing the best he can and pushing forward with that faith. And a maturity that comes that has to just be a spiritual gift. 17-year-olds just don't. We're so self-absorbed, and everything is Twitter and Instagram and all these things, and it wasn't quite that prominent back then, but they're pretty self-absorbed in 17, moving back to teenage years. And here's a kid who somehow, through this experience, has totally pushed beyond that veil, has totally pushed outside that bounds. And so we have experiences in life that teach us how to face this universality of death with faith and courage. And sometimes it comes from seeing a loved one and an old parent pass or someone else, and sometimes it can come from seeing a young 17-year-old boy who was nervous and who had some fears. But when push came to shove, he was just totally outside himself. Well, the only difference with Matt and a 19-year-old young man going on a mission is Matt's mission call came a couple years earlier. And so Matt found himself in the spirit world as a mature man, right? When we're born and we come to earth and our spirits go into our bodies, we have mature spirits. So a baby doesn't have a baby spirit kind of crammed inside that little body. It's a mature spirit. If an infant were to pass away, what goes into the spirit world? A mature spirit. And so sometimes, and you probably get as much false doctrine taught at a funeral as anywhere in the church. And sometimes people have a tendency to think that that little baby is going to be this little baby in heaven. But it's not. It's a mature young woman or a mature young man who's preaching the gospel and actively involved there. A celestial being, a mighty instrument in the hands of the Lord, operating under the keys of the priesthood. And so we start to see a little bit better how those works. There's a song that we love in the church, and you're very familiar with it, and it was written by Eliza R. Snow. I thought it interesting as I thought about it. I had a friend of mine who's going through this process of getting to the other side, a young scout of mine. And the song's written by Eliza R. Snow. It's on my father, and obviously it's teaching about family relations and those things. But this verse is the one that kind of amazes me, the fourth verse, talking about death. When I leave this frail existence, when I lay this mortal by, Father, Mother, may I meet you in your royal courts on high. Then at length, when I have completed all you've sent me forth to do, with your mutual approbation, let me come and dwell with you. That perspective's interesting. So what's she really saying there? Heavenly Father, I'll come to earth, but as soon as I finish whatever you sent me to do, please let me come home. How different is that than our mortal perspective? Our mortal perspective is, I want to be here, and I'm going to scream and shout, and I'm not going to leave this world without a fight. But our premortal view of the beauty and the vastness and the peace and the glory of our Heavenly Father is very, very different. And so when we were preparing to come to earth, we look forward to the time of dying. We look forward to completing what we needed to do, whatever Heavenly Father would have us do. But then please, let me come home. Let me come back to where it's so beautiful, it's so wonderful, and so sweet. So it's just interesting that we get these perspectives. All right, so.
Can I ask you a quick question?
Please.
Knowing this about the spirits really are adult spirits, what about what we've been told about mothers being able to raise their children that they lost.
That's a
In-
great
in
question.
the
So
millennium.
when a baby is born, I remember my first 9 years, 11 years, 9 years, 9 years over 11 years. That doesn't make sense. But married, my mom and dad were in Asia, or on a mission for the church. So we didn't have any grandparents really. I mean, that's how it goes. You know how it goes. And so we used to go up and see Elder McConkie. Bruce every once in a while. He'd teach a lesson every month, and we'd go up and learn. And I went up one time, and he was laying on the floor with one of his little grandchildren, and it was interesting. I was just kind of watching it, and wasn't going up for anyone's benefit, but he's carrying on a conversation with this little baby. And he's trying to ask the baby, what do you see? What do you know? What experience are you having there? Because he understood that trapped in that little teeny body is a full adult spirit. And the veil is thin for those little infants. So your question is, we know that mothers who lose an infant will raise that infant in the resurrection. What that means is, when that infant dies, the full-grown, mature spirit, which it's had for 3 or 4 billion years, and all through its pre-existence, right? It's born and then it grows and matures, comes into that little body. And then when that little one dies, let's say it dies at 3 months old or a day old, it goes into the spirit world, the mature spirit. And then at resurrection, the prophet Joseph taught, there is no growth in the grave. What that means is that little spirit's going to come back down to earth and is going to be resurrected as an infant. She or he will be raised during a millennial period when Satan is bound, and they'll grow up unto exaltation. So all little children who died before the age of accountability are saved in the celestial kingdom of God, section 137. It means that a mother who loses an infant will raise that infant. She'll see that infant learn to talk. She will nurture, and I would suppose nurse that infant, and she will raise that infant to see her date and to choose an eternal companion, which is a great blessing, because in this life, you're really nervous about who your daughters are dating. You wish that standard equipment was a jerkometer that you could just scan the boy as he came in. Find out what these intentions are, right? We want to know what's happening here, and that's what we really desire. Between the millennium, you don't need that. I used to run a little, I don't now, I just enjoy my neighbors running. Yeah, that's right. And I used to get nervous because the girl, you get this 95-pound girl running, but this dog is 300 pounds, and it's 10 o'clock at night, and I'm thinking, if that dog wants to get me, there's no stop with that dog. It's going to carry her around like a rag doll, and I kept getting used to that. Well, the reality is, through the millennium, those things are all gone. And so that little baby will be resurrected as a baby. And the reality is there's no growth in the grave, which is kind of strange. So that also means that if you die at 95 and are an apple person, you know what an apple person is. When you're in elementary school, you carve that little apple and you peel it and you put a little face on it and put it in the windowsill and go. All over. Sometimes you put on black film paper and they call it a witch. It's a little backyard. If you're 95 and an apple person, you'll get resurrected at 95 and an apple person. But Joseph Fielding Smith says in Doctrines of Salvation that almost instantaneously, perhaps instantaneously, you'll be changed back to your prime. So the resurrection is not quite so simple, right? So there's no growth in the grave. You're going to get resurrected exactly as you're laid down. But for an infant, that person's going to have to raise from infancy until it reaches the full maturity of a perfect body. And then that's where they'll remain. Does that make sense? Other questions?
It does, Mike, but I'm hopeful that my spirit's 6 foot tall. And my body grows along with it.
Let's talk about that.
There's no growth in the grave.
No, but there are spiritual rats. What happens? Why do we have the body we have? We have the body we have, and some people have a short body because they maybe had shorter parents. I have a dear friend he is 6'7", she's about 6'4". Her kids are very, very tall, and her daughters are tall, and it's hard for a girl to be 6'2", 6'3", right? I mean, that's a very difficult thing. Will they be resurrected with those bodies? Let me ask another question. If a child is born with Down syndrome, will that child be born with a resurrected body that looks like it has Down syndrome? If you're born without an arm or born without legs? Much of what we look like and much of what we are in this body is mortality and earthly genetics. When I get resurrected, I want a lot better body than I had here. I believe that I was born in that premortal world to a perfect father and a perfect mother. And my genetics inherently are perfect. And when I get resurrected, or in the context of chapter 9, a restoration of all things, I want to be restored to the body I had for 4 or 5 billion years before I was born in mortality. What that means is we have an easy time saying that Down syndrome baby's not going to look that way, or that person without legs not going to look that way. But I'm only this tiny step above that because of mortality. I'm the way I am because I discovered in 9th grade that baldness comes through the mother's side, generally. I don't know if that's even still. That's what they taught me then. It comes through the mother's side. I go to a family reunion, I look at my uncles on my mother's side, and they are trailer hitches with smiles. We are talking Rome. And I'm in 9th grade thinking, I gotta get married really fast when I get home. Because it's not going on. I'm not so sure the body that we have here is reality totally, completely, like a Down syndrome or like anything else. I'm not sure that there aren't mortal factors and that we might actually be a little bit different. Does that make sense? So when we talk about the restoration of all things, I want to be restored to the body I had when I was born to a perfect mother and a perfect father. That's what I want. Now, I'm not saying I'm going to be taller, I'm not saying I'm going to be shorter. I'm just saying that there is so much immortality that determines our size, shape, dimension, and a lot of that is mortal. A lot of that is the earth. My fingernail shapes. You look at your fingernails, you have your mom's fingernails and your dad's fingernails. Right? And I got a little of both, but mostly my dad's. Mine are kind of flat and strange. They're just kind of what they are. Well, I got that because of my dad. Is that my spirit? Is that what I really have? I don't know. I'm hoping for an improvement.
So in the premortal life, though, we were still spirits, so it would be a spirit body.
Yeah,
So we
so
didn't have a mortal body.
we don't have a mortal. When we were in the premortal world, we had a spirit body, right? And so what we're hoping, or what I'm hoping for, is when I get resurrected, that my physical body will resemble my spirit body.
All things were created in the spirit body.
And in fact, we were gonna go there. Let's go there. Let's learn a little bit about the nature of the spirit. Let's go to Moses 3:5. Can we? We're gonna be in 79, but. And the reason, it sounds like we're not teaching Book of Mormon, what I'm hoping to do is, I want us to understand just some basics of these 4 or 5 doctrines. And then when you read Mormon 75:2-9, things start to drop in and they start to make a lot more sense. So if we go to Moses 3:5, it's an interesting. Got anything marked in Moses 3:5? Moses 5. And the verse you had marked probably, kind of a scripture mastery verse I think, or used to be, is verse 5. And it's talking about this spirit creation. And look at what we learned. Verse 5. And every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For I, the Lord God, created all things of which I have spoken spiritually before they were naturally upon the face of the earth. What does that mean? What's a spirit creation? It is a literal creation. As we lived in our premortal home, there were spirit daisies, and there were spirit horses, and there were spirit flowers. It wasn't cloud. And so we go to the temple and you listen closely and you find out that this earth is patterned after something. And it's beautiful and it's perfect. And so those things were literally created physically out of spirit matter. And so he goes on and says, every herb of the field, every plant was created spiritually before it's naturally upon the earth. We drop down now to verse 7. And I, the Lord God, formed man out of the dust of the ground, we'll go there today, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. When do you become a living soul? You become a living soul when you, what?
Spirit enters the body.
When the spirit enters the body. We don't know when that is. The church does not equate abortion to murder. They're careful. Sometimes people do, but the church doesn't. I counseled before with a sister from another country who had had some abortions, and it devastated her. She had it because her husband or boyfriend forced her. It was a devastating thing. I worked and worked and worked with her to try and convince her that she needs to go to the temple. She needs to have a better understanding of how her Heavenly Father loves her. He does not view things quite the same that we may view things. I'm not saying it's not very serious, but we believe that a person can push past that. And there's things that we can still do. She can still go to the temple. She can still be exalted. She can still do those things. That's the teaching of the church. And but it was very, very difficult, and she felt so unworthy that she was never able to quite make that jump. And so those things become, we don't know exactly when that is, but we know that it's early. Ellen McConkie believed it was way early. And he talks about John the Baptist meeting in Elizabeth's womb. It's very, very early in this thing. I know that my personal experience, and maybe some of you could share yours, got called to a hospital where a sister lost her baby 10 minutes before birth. So they got in there, everything was fine, they could pick up the heartbeat, all that was going on, and somewhere in those few minutes, those 10 or so minutes, that baby passed away. As I laid hands on her head and gave her a blessing, the Spirit just says, you're going to have this baby again. You will raise this baby in the resurrection. And every magnified by a millennial day will be yours. You won't be cheated out of any of those experiences. That's what the prophet Joseph taught at Elder King Follett's funeral. As he looked out and began this discourse with his dear friends and sees his mother who had just lost a very little baby sitting in the front row, he makes that doctrine, and that's the doctrine that we now have in the church. All right, we drop down a little bit further. Formed out of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul, body and spirit together. The first flesh upon the earth, the first man also. Nevertheless, look at the experience now, the doctrine is expanded. All things were created, before created. But spiritually were they created and made according to my word. Now drop down verse 9. And out of the ground made I the Lord God to grow every tree that is naturally that is pleasant to the sight of man. And man could behold it. What's the it? It's the tree, right? He could behold the tree. And it, the tree, became also a living soul. What do we learn? Trees are alive. They're encased. Their spirits are encased in a physical tabernacle, and if they're in my yard, they die sooner than expected. That's a problem. But because they were first created spiritually, what does that tell us about resurrection?
So
Is that kind of weird to think? Every blade of grass, every tree, every flower. This process of the restoration is so grand, we can't even begin to comprehend. And there is going to be trees and flowers and everything that lives will exist in terrestrial kingdoms and celestial kingdoms and celestial kingdoms. And they feel the nature of inspiration.
Okay, now here's a question I've wondered a number of times. Okay, in the creation, plants and animals were created before man. And they were given the commandment to multiply and replenish the earth. Were they able actually to keep that commandment prior to the fall?
No. And where do we get the answer to that? Where's the scriptural answer to that? Let's go to it real quick. 2 Nephi.
So even if Adam ate some...
2 Nephi chapter 2. So even if Adam... We tried to figure out this thing, because I went to that dinosaur park. And we do try to figure it out, but there was a point when the earth was created that things were created perfectly. So if we go to 2 Nephi 2, and let's look at verse 22. And now behold, if Adam had not transgressed, he would not have fallen. So 2 Nephi 2:22. But he would have remained in the Garden of Eden, and now what? And all things which were created must have remained in the same state in which they were after they were created. And they must have remained forever and had no end. And so that's pretty clear. So there was a point of time in the earth's history in which God created this earth spiritually first. The earth is spiritually alive, Moses 7. And then he clothed them with physical tabernacles, and there was a point somewhere where all things were perfect. God creates perfect things. And then that necessitates the fall. And so that doctrine of the fall is what separates us from all other religions. We understand how that works. But it takes a little bit of faith, and we don't know how time works. So if we're to go to the 121st section of the doctrine of time, we won't go there. But if we were to go back, they would say that the time's going to come when we'll understand the times and the seasons. We're going to understand the rotations of the earth and how time works and how these things go. We don't understand that very well right now. That's a promise that we'll get at the beginning of the millennium. We'll start to see these things and how they work. All right, well, I've told stories today, but we haven't got as far in the scriptures as we need to. Let's go. We talked a little, but that kind of, how many have you ever thought about trees and all that stuff getting resurrected before?
There's going to be a lot of trees.
There's a lot of trees, and there's a lot of worlds to create. Well, that's a word. But to populate with all that thing. And it also tells us a little bit about the spirit world and what the spirit world was like before we came here, and how beautiful it was, and how spectacular, and how beautiful things will be afterwards. God loves his children. And people in the celestial kingdom, the prophet Joseph would teach, well, we don't have his exact words, we have Wilt recording him several times, Wilt the Buddha, that's a pretty good source, that even the celestial kingdom is spectacular, 1,000 times more beautiful than we can comprehend. And we know that all God's children will eventually be resurrected, even the sons of perdition, but all will receive a kingdom of glory, accepting the sons of perdition. And so eventually, the term used in the Doctrine and Covenants is that I will save all the works in which the Father has placed my hand. In other words, all these children are going to be saved. They're going to be saved in varying degrees, but it will be beautiful and wonderful. Where they go will be beautiful. God loves his children. All right, let's go on. Let's go down a little bit. Let's get in and get okay.
Mike, will Satan
Please.
get that same? Will he get to be resurrected and have glory, or is he?
Why not, Bishop?
Well, he never had a body.
Yeah, and
So you're talking
here
about
we
the
go
1/3
to Abraham.
that went with him won't get anything.
They never get a body. They never get a body. That's why when we go to the 76th section, about 25th verse, It's quiet, but let's go there real quick.
What do you mean when you say the sons of perdition? Who is that?
Sons of perdition are Lucifer and the angels that follow after him. That third of the host of heaven, that third part, however big that is. And it is also a handful of individuals in this life, one of which, we don't know any of them for practicality. Judas, and there's some debate on that. I sent that question home with Liz Irving to ask her father when I talked to her second. So if I got questions, I got stuff out. I sent them home with Liz. I'm going to ask your dad how this works. And she'd come back and give me this scripture and tell me that. It was awesome. So, there is this young gal.
But you just said sons of perdition, and you just said those are the ones that didn't get
Sons of
bodies.
perdition are those that didn't keep their first estate. They
Right,
weren't
so-
faithful and kept their first
He
estate. But
means
there
the ones
are
from here.
a few sons of perdition in this world.
So
And
the ones that did come here and get their bodies, they will. But the ones that never came, they won't.
They never get a body.
So
Where do
won't.
they go?
They're going to go into a place called outer darkness. Outer darkness is one of those words that has different definitions. But usually the term outer darkness means it's a place without glory or any light of Christ. And there they'll remain. And so if we were to go, let's go to the 76th section quickly, just fast. And we're going to do verse about 25, I think. And this we saw also and bear record that an angel of God who is in authority in the presence of God, that angel is Lucifer. He had authority, he had priesthood, who rebelled against the only begotten Son, whom the Father had loved, and who is in the bosom of the Father, and Christ was the creator from the very beginning, was thrust down from the presence of God, and was called perdition, which literally means lost.
Sorry, can you tell us what verse you're in?
So in section 76, verse 25.
Okay,
And was called perdition, which means lost. For the heavens wept over him. He was Lucifer. Does anyone know what the name Lucifer means if you go to the Bible dictionary? Light bringer. Lucifer was a light bringer. He was a magnificent, great teacher. And he would bring light. I used to tell my students, you should name your first child Lucifer.
But I noticed you did.
Michael. Michael the God. Lucifer literally means glorious one, a light bringer, a great teacher. He was called Lucifer, a son of the morning, meaning born early in the creation of things. The longer you live in light and glory, the more intelligent you become. And Lucifer did. We don't know when he was born. He wasn't the second born. Sometimes I hear that, and there are no scriptures that say that. But he was early born. He was the son of the morning, born early in the morning of creation. And then verse 27, and lo, we beheld, and we beheld, and lo, he is fallen, exclamation point. He is fallen, even a son of the morning. And so that weeping, that sadness for those individuals was because they're people we knew. Those are brothers and sisters who sat on the bed with us and told us stories, and we knew their hearts, and we played games with them, and all the things that we do here in mortality that aren't wicked and corrupted, we did there with them. And then they're lost. And they place themselves outside the atoning blood of Christ. And then for the next big chunk of this doctrine comes, it talks a little bit about this more in heaven, but once you start picking it up about verse 31, for the next 10 or 12 verses, it's talking about what it takes to become a son of perdition. You have to look at the sun at noonday and say it does not shine. You have to say, if I had power, if I could, I would crucify Christ again on the cross. You have to say, I love Satan more than God. You have to do those things, but then you also have to have power and priesthood and other things to do those things. It's not easy. So 99.9% of humankind can't do that, but there are some that could. And one that we know for sure that did is Cain. And Cain's even told that he'll have power over Lucifer in the next life, in the full great Christ, because why? Because he has a body, and that's going to give him that power. And so we kind of see that. So yeah, so those sons of perdition, and then some in this life. I knew a fellow, Cal Stevens. He was on the correlation committee, and he got in and he read a list of individuals who were sons of perdition, written by Joseph.
Wow.
That's a pretty authoritative list. So he reads over this list. Cal is very bright, has a very sharp mind. Comes home and he says, I came home and I couldn't remember one name. He just left it. I just took a little magic eraser went bang. So we don't make those judgments, but there are some. There are some, and they'll get resurrected, and it's a horrible, horrible fate. In fact, no one ever sees that. The prophet Joseph was sold, and unless you're a partaker of that, you don't see it. And he says, I saw a glimpse, and immediately the vision was shut up. I couldn't see that. So we don't worry about that too much. But it is kind of a sad thing. But it also is the part of agency. There are these opposites. And if you can become celestial, it's also possible that you can sink the other direction. Does that make sense? I mean, it's possible, and Cain did that. All right, let's go back to 75:9. He talks about the importance of the atonement, verse 7, wherefore it must needs be an infinite atonement, if it's going to save all these infinite things and resurrect all these infinite things, and you've got infinite worlds, you look at all those things, and we've looked at some of those things, and I always would hesitate almost to teach that to young seminary students, just because we're so inward focused that sometimes we begin to feel small. And for me, even just this summer, I went to New York with my daughter Beth, and just being at Times Square, I felt small. You just look at how many people are there and how vast this is. I'm at one little dot on the earth seeing this kind of stuff. So sometimes I think that's how Satan whispers to us that we're not worthy, we're not worth it, we're so small, God isn't concerned with us, but it's not what the Revelations teach. And yet thou art there, and thou art good, and thou art merciful, whoever that listeneth there. And so that's what the Spirit will teach us. So we go down, verse 7, the same be an infinite atonement, this corruption could not put on incorruption, wherefore this first judgment which came upon men must needs remain to an endless duration. We've got to close. If so, this flesh must have laid down to rot and crumbled with Mother Earth to rise no more. Oh, the wisdom of God, His mercy and grace. And then he goes on and says, if we weren't to resurrect, we would become angels to a devil. That's talking about Lucifer's plan. Lucifer's plan was, I'm not going to allow this mortal existence to go on where anybody wants. I want them to take of the fruit, want to live forever in their sins. I don't want them to have a probationary period. I don't want them to have the ability to repent and do those things. And I want them to, just fail miserably. Verse 9. Let's go down to verse 10, however. Because I think we talked a little bit about verse 9 last week. I teach so many different lessons. I get a little messed up. Oh, how great the goodness of our God, who prepared the way for our escape from the grasp of that awful monster, yea, that monster, death and hell, which I call the death of the body, and also the death of the spirit. Well, can a spirit die? No, a spirit can't die. That's the whole point of what he's making here. So what is
Separation from the Father.
exactly? It's vastly worse than death. When Alma got himself in a little bit of problem, what did he wish for? Oh, that I could become extinct, that I could call mountains to come down and hide me. That's not possible, and he discovers that's not possible, and that's what makes it so sad in some ways. And because of the way of deliverance of our God, the Holy One of Israel, verse 11, this death of which I have spoken, which is temporal, shall deliver up its dead, which death is the grave. And this death of which I have spoken, which is spiritual, shall deliver up its dead, which spiritual death is hell. Wherefore death and hell must deliver up their dead, and hell must deliver up its captive spirits, and the grave must deliver up its captive bodies, and the bodies and the spirits of men will be restored to one another by the power of the resurrection of the Holy One of Israel. And then he goes on and talks about, we were going to talk today, and we've got to close, but we were going to talk today, remind me, I wanted to talk a little bit about paradise and the experience, and I'll give you that experience. We'll just close with that. This is this description. This is Heber Kimball speaking at the funeral service Jedediah M. Grant. So Heber and Jedediah were counselors to Brigham Young. So this is a week after he's died. They're having the funeral in the tabernacle, maybe a little less than a week. He's talking about what happened just last week. He says, I laid my hands upon him to bless him and ask God to strengthen his lungs that he might be easier. Not to heal him, but that it might be easier for him. And in 2 or 3 minutes, he raised himself up and talked for about an hour as busily as he could, telling me what he had seen and what he had understood. He said to me, Brother Heber, I have been into the spirit world the last 2 nights in succession, and of all the dreads that ever came across me, the worst I have had, the worst was to have to return again to my body, though I had to do it. And then he goes on and he says, he saw the righteous gathered together in the spirit world. There were no wicked spirits there where he was in paradise among them. He saw his wife. She was the first person that met him. He spoke of the buildings he saw, remarking that the Lord gave Solomon wisdom and poured gold and silver into his hands that he might display his skill and ability. And he said that the temple erected by Solomon was much inferior to the most ordinary buildings that he saw in the spirit world. In regards to gardens, said Brother Grant, I have seen good gardens on this earth, but I never saw any to compare with those that were there. I saw flowers of numerous kinds, and some with 50 to 100 different colored flowers growing upon one stalk. He goes on to do this great statement. After speaking of the gardens and the beauty of everything there, Brother Grant said he felt extremely sorrowful as having to leave so beautiful a place and come back to earth, where he looked upon his body with loathing, but he was obliged to enter it again. And he goes on and gives that instruction. So that is Journal of Discourses, Volume 4, page 135. And there's a lot to that. He sees his sweet wife first. He sees his wife holding a little baby. That's interesting because what? We know that they're a ghost spirit. But in this vision, he sees her holding a little baby. I think there was a reason for it. And the reason was this little baby, I think her name was Elizabeth, had died coming across from the plains and had been buried. They went back to get her and found that she'd been eaten up by the wolves. And Sister Grant says to Jedediah, I have her again, and she is safe. So we can't do this little thing. Brothers and sisters, the gospel is wonderful. It's just wonderful, and we'll talk about some of these things and kind of push forward. I'll have to go much further faster, not too many stories, but how blessed we are to have that knowledge and that understanding, and to know that the Lord loves us, and that there'll come a time when every soul on this earth, plant and animal and people, will return home to that loving Heavenly Father who gave them life. We will go into that spirit world, and there is a vast work there, vastly greater than the work here. The missionary effort there this is just microscopic on earth compared to that effort being directed under the direction of Joseph, who holds the keys there. May we have faith, and may we press forward, and may we have the assurance and the peace that Heavenly Father knows us and loves us and has prepared a place for us. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.